Once upon a time, in the prosperous and vibrant kingdom of Zuwara, there lived a young princess named Amina. As the only daughter of King Bekari, she was cherished and loved by her father, a ruler renowned throughout the lands for his wisdom in governance, his valor in battle, and his commitment to justice. Under King Bekari's leadership, Zuwara had flourished. Its markets were filled with merchants from distant lands, the fields were green and lush, and the people were proud of their king. But for all his virtues, King Bekari had a flaw: he was deeply overprotective of his daughter. The king had suffered a terrible loss years before when Queen Mora, Amina's mother, had died in a tragic accident. Since that day, he had grown fearful of anything that might cause him to lose his daughter, the last remaining piece of his beloved queen. He kept her sheltered in the palace, confined behind its high walls, and surrounded by guards who watched her every move. He loved her fiercely, but his love had become like a cage, and Amina, who was lively and full of curiosity, began to feel trapped. From her chamber window, she often gazed longingly at the village below, where the villagers lived their simple yet colorful lives. She watched the children running and playing in the fields, the women gathering at the well, and the men returning from their work in the fields. She saw the way they laughed, cried, and carried on with their daily tasks, and she yearned to be among them, to know their stories, and to understand their struggles. One evening, after another day spent within the confines of the palace, Amina found herself sitting in the grand dining hall with her father. The hall was filled with the flickering light of torches, and a sumptuous feast was laid out before them: roast lamb, spiced rice, sweet dates, and honeyed pastries. But Amina had little appetite. She watched her father as he spoke with his advisors, his brow furrowed in thought. She decided to try once more. "Father," she began softly, "I've been thinking." King Bekari turned to her, his stern expression softening as he looked at his daughter. "What is it, my dear?" "I would like to visit the village," Amina continued, her voice steady but earnest. "Just for a day, to see how our people live. I want to understand them better." King Bekari sighed, setting down his goblet. "Amina, we have discussed this many times," he said firmly. "The world outside these walls is dangerous. You are my only child, my heart. I cannot risk losing you as I lost your mother." "But, father," Amina persisted, her dark eyes filled with determination, "how can I be a good ruler if I do not know my people? How can I understand their needs if I never see their lives?" The king's face softened, but his tone remained firm. "You can learn all you need to know from here, Amina. The people are happy and content. You are safe in the palace, where you belong." Amina nodded, but her heart was heavy with frustration and longing. That night, as she lay in her large canopy bed, listening to the distant sounds of the village outside, she made a decision. If her father would not allow her to see the world, she would have to find a way herself. The next morning, while her maid was away, Amina snuck into the servants' quarters and found a plain brown tunic and a tattered cloak. She smeared her face and arms with soot from the fireplace to disguise her fair complexion. She took a sharp knife and, with a deep breath, cut off her long, flowing hair, watching as the thick, black locks fell to the floor. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror. She was no longer Princess Amina, the sheltered daughter of King Bekari. She was now just Amara, a common girl with no particular standing. That night, when the palace was quiet and the guards were at their post, Amina slipped through the secret passages she had discovered as a child. She knew the palace like the back of her hand and moved silently through the dimly lit corridors. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. She reached the back gate where a single guard stood watch. Waiting until he turned away, she darted past him into the cool night air, her heart racing with the thrill of freedom. The village lay nestled at the foot of the hill upon which the palace stood. As Amina made her way down the winding path, the world around her seemed to come alive in a way she had never experienced. The scent of blooming jasmine filled her nostrils, mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil. She could hear the faint sounds of laughter, music, and chatter drifting up from the village square, where the villagers gathered to celebrate the end of the day's labor. Her heart soared with anticipation, and she quickened her pace, eager to immerse herself in this new world. The marketplace was still bustling, even at this late hour. Lanterns hung from poles, casting a warm, golden light over the colorful stalls that lined the streets. Vendors called out their wares, fresh fish from the river, ripe mangoes, woven baskets, and finely crafted pottery. Children ran about, playing games, their laughter echoing through the air. The smell of roasting meat and spices made Amina's stomach growl, and she realized she had not eaten since she left the palace. She wandered through the market, taking in the sights and sounds around her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. She could hear the clatter of coins, the hum of voices, the braying of donkeys, and the soft murmurs of conversations. She noticed the weariness in the eyes of the villagers, the lines etched into their faces by years of hard work. She saw the joy in the children's laughter and the worry in their parents' eyes. She felt a deep sense of connection to these people, her people, whom she had never truly known. But as the hours passed, Amina began to realize that she had no money, no food, and nowhere to sleep. She knew she needed to find work quickly if she was to survive in this new world. She approached a woman selling fruit at a stand, an elderly vendor with kind eyes but a wary expression. "Excuse me, ma'am," Amina said, trying to sound humble and meek. "Do you have any work for me? I can do anything, carry water, sweep floors, whatever you need." The woman looked at her skeptically, noticing the smoothness of Amina's hands. "You don't look like you've done much hard work," she said. Amina quickly hid her hands behind her back. "I'm stronger than I look," she insisted. "Please, I work for any wage, just enough to eat." The woman studied her for a moment, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, girl. I've no work for you. Try old Zara's house down the street. She's always in need of help." Amina thanked her and made her way to the small, humble house at the edge of the village. She knocked on the door, and after a moment, an old woman opened it. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and bright. "Yes," the woman asked, her voice rough but not unkind. "Good evening, ma'am," Amina said, bowing her head. "My name is Amora. I'm looking for work. The fruit seller said you might need some help." The old woman, Zara, looked Amina up and down, assessing her. "I could use some help," she said finally, "but I cannot pay you much." "I don't need much," Amina replied. "Just enough to live on." Zara nodded and stepped aside. "Very well. Come in. Start by sweeping the floor." Amina took the broom and began to sweep, feeling a sense of satisfaction she had never known in the palace. She worked diligently, determined to prove herself. The work was harder than she expected, her arms ached, and her back throbbed, but she refused to complain. Zara watched her closely, nodding in approval at her efforts. As the days passed, Zara began to trust Amina more, giving her more responsibilities, fetching water from the river, mending clothes, and cooking simple meals. Amina learned quickly, and her hands grew rough and callous from the labor. She found herself enjoying the work, the feeling of accomplishment that came with each completed task. She also began to learn about the villagers' lives, their struggles, and their stories. One morning, Amina awoke early to the sounds of roosters crowing and the clatter of carts in the distance. She quickly washed her face with the cold water from the basin and wrapped a scarf around her head to keep her hair from falling into her eyes. Zara was already up, stoking the fire in the hearth, preparing to bake bread. "Amora, child," Zara called, "could you fetch some water from the well? The bucket is by the door." "Yes, Zara," Amina replied, grabbing the wooden bucket and heading outside. The air was crisp and cool, and a thin mist clung to the ground. As she made her way to the village well, she saw the villagers beginning their day, women with baskets on their heads, men preparing their tools for work, and children running barefoot in the dirt. Amina reached the well and began to draw water, her arms straining with the effort. As she walked, a young blacksmith named Kofi approached. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a warm smile and a lively glint in his eye. He had noticed the new girl in the village and was curious about her. "Good morning," Kofi greeted her. "I've seen you around. You're new here, aren't you?" Amina nodded, feeling a flutter in her stomach. "Yes, I'm Amora. I came here looking for work." Kofi smiled. "And have you found it?" Amina laughed softly. "Oh, I've found plenty of work, but not much pay." Kofi chuckled. "That's the way of things in this village. But you seem different from the others. There's something about you." Amina felt a pang of fear. "I'm just a simple girl," she said quickly. "Trying to make a living." Kofi nodded, still smiling. "Well, it's good to have you here, Amora. If you ever need help, come find me. I'm always around." Over the following weeks, Amina and Kofi grew closer. He would often find excuses to visit Zora's house, bringing gifts of fresh bread or offering to help with repairs. They would talk for hours by the river, sharing stories and dreams. Kofi spoke of his desire to create beautiful things with his hands, to make the finest swords and tools in the kingdom. Amina found herself drawn to his kindness and passion. One afternoon, as they sat by the river, Kofi turned to her with a serious expression. "Amora, why did you come to this village?" he asked. "You don't talk much about your past." Amina hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to see the world," she said finally. "I wanted to understand what it means to live like everyone else, to know what it feels like to struggle, to hope, to dream." Kofi nodded, impressed by her sincerity. "That's a noble reason. Many of us are born here and never get to see beyond the hills. You're brave to come here alone." Amina smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Thank you, Kofi," she said softly. "But I'm not as brave as you think." As time went on, Amina's presence in the village began to make a difference. She continued to help the villagers in small but meaningful ways, sharing her wages, organizing secret meetings where villagers could voice their grievances, and encouraging them to stand up for themselves. She became known for her compassion and wisdom, and many began to seek her advice. But not everyone was pleased with Amina's influence. The local tax collector, a man named Musa, was known for his cruelty and greed. He had noticed that the villagers were growing bolder, speaking out against the taxes and even refusing to pay. He suspected that someone was encouraging them, stirring up trouble. And his eyes had settled on the new girl, Amora. One day, Musa came to Zora's house under the pretense of checking on her tax payments. He found Amina there, sweeping the floor. "You there, girl," Musa barked. "What's your name?" Amina looked up, her heart racing. "Amora," she replied calmly. Musa eyed her suspiciously. "Where do you come from, Amora? You don't look like you belong here." Amina met his gaze steadily. "I'm from a village far from here," she said. "I came here looking for work." Musa frowned, not convinced. "Well, you'd better watch yourself, girl. There are laws in this village, and I don't take kindly to troublemakers." Amina nodded, keeping her face neutral. "I'm no troublemaker, sir. I'm just trying to earn an honest living." Musa grunted and left, but Amina could feel his eyes on her as he walked away. She knew she needed to be more careful, but she also felt a renewed sense of determination. She could not abandon the villagers now. They needed her. Then, one day, a proclamation came from the palace. King Bekari announced that there would be a grand banquet to celebrate the anniversary of his reign. All the villagers were invited to attend, and a competition would be held to find the best storyteller in the kingdom. The winner would receive a substantial reward and the king's favor. The village buzzed with excitement, but Amina saw it as an opportunity. She knew this was her chance to speak directly to her father and make him understand the plight of his people. She would disguise herself further, enter the competition, and tell a story that would open his eyes. Kofi noticed her excitement and asked, "Are you planning to enter the competition, Amora?" Amina nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Yes, I have a story to tell, one that needs to be heard." Kofi smiled, his eyes full of admiration. "I'm sure it will be a great story. I'll be there to cheer you on." On the day of the banquet, Amina dressed in an even simpler garment, wrapping herself in a shawl to hide her face. She made her way to the palace with the other villagers, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. The grand hall was filled with people, and the king sat on his throne, surrounded by nobles and guards. The competition began, with several storytellers taking the stage to share their tales of heroism, love, and adventure. Finally, it was Amina's turn. She stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. She began to speak, her voice steady and clear. "My story is about a king," she began, "a king who was wise and powerful, but who forgot his people. He lived in a grand palace, surrounded by wealth and luxury, while his subjects struggled and suffered. He hosted grand feasts and celebrations, but his people had little to eat. He was blind to their pain, deaf to their cries." As Amina continued her story, the hall fell silent. Everyone listened intently, including King Bekari. Her words were bold and cutting, painting a picture of a ruler who had lost touch with his people, who had allowed his pride and fear to cloud his judgment. "But," she continued, "there was a princess in this kingdom, a young woman who saw the truth. She disguised herself as a commoner and went into the village to live among the people. She saw their suffering, felt their pain, and decided to act. She knew that a true ruler must see with their own eyes, hear with their own ears, and rule with their heart." King Bekari's eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward in his seat. There was something familiar about this storyteller, something in her voice that tugged at his memory. But he could not place it. And so, Amina concluded, this princess went to her father, the king, and pleaded with him to change, to listen, to care. She risked everything for her people, for she knew that a kingdom is not made of walls and gold, but of the hearts and souls of its people. There was